desperate for hope that recovery from your eating disorder is possible? Do you feel afraid, ashamed, alone, or misunderstood? Or maybe you know someone struggling, but you don't know how to help. Friend, you are in the right place. Welcome to the Recover with God podcast, where you'll hear stories of recovery, personal and professional advice, and hope that only comes from God. You are not alone. You are understood. And God is here right now to walk this journey with you. Hello to you listening right now. I'm Jamie, host of the Recover with God podcast, and I'm here today with Callie Logan. Callie is an author, speaker, and writer for Crosswalk. She's been featured on numerous media outlets, including the 700 Club. And I first learned about Callie when I heard her on another podcast. Callie is also a U.S. history teacher. How cool is that? History was one of my favorite subjects in school, and I am a big fan of her movie scene reenactments on Instagram. You'll have to check those out. She just has a joy for life, and I know you're going to love her too. Callie, thank you for being here today to share your story on the podcast.
Hey, thank you so much for having me on. I'm so happy to be here.
Well, I know this is going to be a great conversation. And I love to start out with a question on zeal. So if anyone's been listening to the podcast for a couple episodes, you'll know this question. But zeal is one of my favorite words, and my definition is living with a passionate pursuit of a purpose. So I like to ask everyone, what does living with zeal look like in your life right now?
I think living with zeal is living vibrantly in all you were created to be.
That's a nice, succinct answer. I like the vibrant part of that too, because that's just gives us such a beautiful word picture of what it looks like. It's like that zest for life. So perfect. Thank you. And then I'd like to open it up for you to share your story, who you are, and of course why you're here today on the podcast.
Yeah, I'm so happy to be here. So I'm Callie. Like you said, a history teacher, writer, author, all the things. But I've had a very interesting journey, and I was so excited when I saw that you were going to start this podcast because I think it's something that often, even within the church, but I think society just as a whole, it's almost taboo to talk about, to kind of bring to the table and to vulnerably share, like, hey, so I have an eating disorder. I struggle with this. And, everybody has a different story and relationship with food. And I've said often before, for people who struggle with alcoholism, there's that aspect of it, but they can omit alcohol from their lives. And when you have an eating disorder, you can't omit food. And so
Exactly.
it becomes one of relationship with food. And I've had a very interesting relationship with food for several years now, in the way of where eating disorder will pop up and in different ways, and roller coaster. And so for me, it began when I was in my teen years. I was very bullied in high school, and I don't think anyone ever asked for it. I don't think anyone has some big reason why they should be bullied, but I did fit some of the qualifications of what would lead children to harass me a bit. I was very shy, very soft-spoken. I was kind of super duper quirky with dressing before it was cool. So
Oh, I love that though.
so definitely caps on my skirt kind of thing, like embroidered, and that was not a thing then. That was, we're talking 15 years before cottagecore was even a word.
You're ahead of your time.
Right. But so I definitely got bullied a lot, and I kind of fell under this belief of, well, if I can look like the other girls, maybe they'll just leave me alone. And it wasn't even that I wanted to be popular or I even wanted to fit in. I just wanted them to leave me alone. And I think that's where a lot of the lie and agreement began to connect. And a lot of worth came in that too. I didn't value myself. I had a low self-worth. And I set the bar pretty low, even to start with. And so that was when the agreement with the eating disorder really began. And it has been something that has been an interesting relationship of battling and coming into recovery, I guess now for 16 years or so.
Yeah. It's interesting you call it an agreement. I've never thought about it like that, but you are kind of entering into this almost like a contract or almost like a relationship with your eating disorder for sure. And that's why it can feel so real and so, encompassing. But and the bullying though, that's tough. And not knowing how to deal with that, especially at a young age, that can sure be challenging. It made me think of just like, anyone's childhood really, where you wonder anything you say to someone can have such an impact and you really just don't even know where that can take them. And for you, it was an eating disorder. For other people, it could be, other things that are disordered. And another thing I thought was really interesting because I felt the same thing about not being able to get rid of food, where, like you said, when someone's alcoholic, you just stop drinking or other addictions like that. But with food, it was my challenge too. Like, how is this going to work? Like, how can I live, still have to eat? How's this going to work? And that was definitely a challenge for me. Um, so when you were struggling, would you describe kind of your relationship with God during that time? I mean, I don't know exactly when that relationship was established with him, but how did that play out?
So from an early age, I grew up, thankfully. Oh my gosh, I have the best parents, and
Mm,
they really introduced me to Christ, since day one. And I entered into more of a personal relationship with Jesus in my teen years, and really that active, just not praying to the ceiling, not just praying the bedtime prayers and the mealtime prayers, but to actually like pursue and be pursued in relationship, which changed so much because for someone who was such a loner and still is, I don't count that as something bad because I'm alone with Christ.
mm,
And there's a joy in that, in that relationship with him. And it's definitely been something that, in taking that to him, I see my body in every way now. Like he's helped me to reshape it, that my body is a vessel of the Lord. It's his house. It is, we have, when we accept Jesus into our hearts and we accept baptism by the Holy Spirit, Christ dwells within us.
yeah.
And I felt not called out in the way of where I felt condemned, but I did feel this conviction, even here recently, and kind of a bit of a relapse that, I am a vessel of the Lord. So am I doing a good job of honoring his his house, and am I honoring him in that way? And that's definitely something that has gone back and forth in conversation with the Lord where, Paul talks about, I don't want to do these things, yet I do these things.
Yeah.
And recognizing that humanity that we have, but not letting it be like, oh, well, in a shrug, and then to continue to sin, but to continuously take those thoughts captive
Mm,
and
yeah.
to bring them into obedience to the Lord. And that's a daily practice. Um, Even in the way of, you go out to dinner, you have a big meal, and there is that temptation of where, Satan will be like, well, you could just have a guilt-free meal if you go throw it up. And it's like, no,
Yep.
because that doesn't honor this body. That doesn't
Mhm.
honor this vessel of the Lord. And I think it's in a way surrendering this flesh over to the Lord and saying, I need your help and I can't do this alone. And I want to live as a living sacrifice. So I'm going to give you this vessel and to ask you for help with this struggle in this area that it is very weak. But in my weakness, you are made strong, Father. So help me because I can't do this alone.
That's the heart of this podcast right there, what you just said, knowing that recovery does require doing it with God and not thinking, well, either you have to do it in your own strength or not thinking that you have to recover and then you can go to God once you've fix this problem, and feeling shame before you do. That's not how it works. God wants to be part of the struggle, part of the solution. I love all of the Romans that you were quoting there. Paul is one of my favorites in the Bible, and his story is just it is a beautiful picture of that process and how human we are. And I love that God allowed not just Paul, but like David. There's so many people in the Bible who God allowed those stories there for us to see that they were not perfect. They didn't get to a point where they arrived and it was just okay and they never struggled with anything. There was always something that just kept pulling them back to God through their entire lives. So I think that's so important to emphasize that we need God not just once, we continually need him throughout our lives and throughout the process. So that's yeah, that's so important to share. Thank you. But yeah, Romans, y'all need to read some Romans. But it's the verses about, you know, I don't want to do what I'm doing or what I want to do, I can't do. Like that's one of the most real parts of the Bible, I feel like, where you're just like, this is so relevant still today. Um, Was there a turning point for you? I know you said recently you had a relapse, but previously, like throughout your journey, was there any specific turning point that you recall where you really felt like, God, I need you, or I have to do something different?
There's been a few. I think
Mhm.
for me, I won't be so bold as to say that, I am perfect with all of this. Here recently, I had a lot of things going on in my personal life that led to a relapse, and there was so much shame that I put on myself just for going through that and trying to hide it. And it was funny how friends of mine, though I gave zero signs whatsoever of an eating disorder outwardly, perhaps maybe just, I was a little skinnier than normal,
Mhm.
um, were lovingly coming alongside me. And it was because in prayer, the Lord had prompted them to pray about that for me.
Wow.
And I felt so seen in a different way and honestly really grateful. And it was a good call out. And I think just then vulnerably taking it to the Lord and stop striving in myself. And that was kind of the most recent turning point of just, okay, God, I have to admit this. This is like a thing, and I can't
Mhm.
hide behind it. So can you help me? And that was one of the biggest turning points. I think prior to that, one of the other turning points was just recognizing that if I wanted to have the things I desire in my heart in the future, I knew I was going to have to change what I was enabling myself to do. And one of those things is I so deeply want to be a mom one day. And I was talking with somebody one day and I realized, and they had shared about eating disorders and different things and how they can have an effect on the body.
Mhm.
And I thought, if I want to have children one day, I need to stop doing what I'm doing because there were several years I went for like over a year without a period because my weight was so low. And that can't be good on on anything. And it was a good pivot point for me. And thankfully, it wasn't at some hospitalization point or a doctor calling me out, but it definitely was a point in which I felt that conviction come over me, and that wasn't okay. That I was at a level that low, that the body shut down in such a way. And that was over 10 years ago. And it was just like, okay, if I really want these things in the future, then I need to treat my body right so that it could have those things one day when the time is right. So,
Seeing the future goal or what you want for your future, that seems to help a lot. I know for me that was a big part of it too. It started to terrify me more of kind of living with it for the rest of my life and then sacrificing other things than just the terror of how do I stop? How do I recover? And so I love that part of your motivation. And I think God, puts those desires in our hearts too. Of like, this is the good I have for you. Like God wants us to have his best. And so, and this, an eating disorder definitely does not allow a lot of those things to happen. And God bless your friends for, I mean, obviously God used them, but just, it sounds like they came to you in a very loving way and made you feel, instead of more shame, made you feel that, you could to them, or that, you wanted to change. But yeah,
Yeah.
shame is such a tool of the enemy. And it's hard to let go of that, whether it's with God or other people. And that's why, having an eating disorder is such an isolating thing, because you are sitting there in this shame, like you don't want to be found out. And it's like a whole secret life in a
Yeah,
way.
it really is. And my
Mhm.
friend came in such a loving fashion, which I think takes a lot of courage on her end.
Yeah.
And she did it in such a graceful way. Like I knew she was walking with the Lord and how to approach it because she came at it from a side angle of a
Mm.
check, not a rebuke, not a way that I felt targeted or like condemned. Um,
Mm.
because I had had someone else say something and it was in a condemning way. And I
Ah.
felt like a naughty child. I felt like a child who was receiving a lashing. And that caused me to spiral more into it because I felt like I was receiving a punishment for something. And it was interesting just the difference between the two approaches. And I think that's a lot of it, we have opportunity if we see something to say something, but it's you have to walk it in a delicate line because even if your friend has a strong composure about them, that's a weak point and it can literally make or break what you're trying to accomplish.
That's a good point of distinction, and really interesting that you had both sides of it, around the same time, of one friend, kind of approaching it one way, one approaching it in the other way. So, for anyone listening too, if you know someone who's struggling, and that maybe that's why you're listening today, I think that's such good advice, or just something to really think about, and how you approach with love versus that, you know, punishment type mentality of creating more shame, because that is definitely not going to help, and can in a lot of ways just either make someone feel more shame or make you feel almost defensive in a way too. I think that was sometimes my reaction, was just being defensive about it, instead of just knowing, oh, this person just really cares about me, and they're right, so I think that's really helpful advice for anyone listening. And also, if you're out there and you're struggling with an eating disorder and you're afraid of how someone might approach you, or what people might say, I feel that it would help anyone just embrace the loving way, and just know that people do really care. And not everyone's going to say it perfectly, but just knowing people care, and like you said, kind of just like a check-in, just showing that, hey, I want the best for you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, well, that was, yeah, super helpful. I love having advice for people who want to help a friend or a family member too. Um, were there any, I don't necessarily want to call them habits, was there anything helpful that you kind of changed in your life, whether it was early on or just at any point in your recovery, that you thought made it easier or helped you to not fall back into eating disorder habits?
A lot of that was relationship with food. I got a great book that was talking about that completely centered around boundaries and relationship with food. And I realized that as children, we are taught different things. And at least from, I was born in 92, so total millennial, like it was kind of a common thing as kids of being part of the like clean your plate club.
Yeah.
And that was, something that parents often would say to us in total love. Like they meant nothing but like love towards that. But I think relearning a relationship with food that I don't have to feel bad if I don't clean my plate, but I don't have to feel good if I don't clean my plate. And looking at food in a new way of it is something that is to nourish my body. It is fuel. And I do need to eat, but I need to even be conscious of the things I'm putting in it. It's very easy with eating disorders to kind of fall into that. well, I can eat nothing all day and then I can go get a Big Mac and then I'm only at 550 calories for the day. So I win. And it's like, no, you have not fueled your body with nutrients because all that is a lot of carbs and that's still an eating disorder. It's just in a different variant. So I think a lot of that was relearning habits in relationship with food and why food is important, what food is important, and then also looking at it, I am allowed to sometimes have a treat. Like I am not a horrible person for having a cookie, you know?
Mm.
So that was a lot that I picked up on was just reestablishing relationship with food, that food is not the enemy, but food is not necessarily a friend either. Food is food. Food is fuel. Food is it goes in the body so that I can perform and do other things and help and bless other people. So that was a big thing of no longer being afraid of food too. I think that
Mhm.
was something I was so scared all the time of food. And it's not a monster. Um, but it's not a comfort either. And so that was a really big habit I had to learn was a reestablishing a no longer toxic relationship with food and to let my relationship with food be my relationship with food. I didn't have to impose it on other people and I didn't have to they didn't have to understand it either. Um, and that was a huge aspect of it too. And it allowed me a lot more freedom because it can be very easy with peer pressure, people thinking they're helping, thinking pushing you towards the clean plate eaters club. Oh, well then, she'll gain some weight, she'll be okay, and then everything's happy days. And that doesn't actually get to the root of the problem. Um, a big thing I had to learn too was actually reaching the root of the problem. Uh, John Eldredge in his book Wild at Heart, which is a stellar book. It's
I need
written
to
for
read
men,
it.
but I think it's for mankind, honestly.
Mm.
And when I was in a lot of recovery, the Lord led me to read that book. And he talks about different struggles and temptations that we have as human beings. And how if you continue to allow the weeds to pop up and you pull the weeds, they're just going to continue to pop up. And he talks about a tap root. And it's finding that initial original root of the problem and uprooting that.
Wow.
And for me, it took a lot of therapy and a lot of prayer, but ultimately what came down to was worthiness. And that was actually the bigger problem, even more than relationship with food. So I think developing that habit of, okay, if I've got a problem and I sense that I'm going to fall into relapse, where am I not feeling worthy? Or is there something deeper at hand? And I think lastly, just in that same vein, looking at distraction, wait a second. I even found myself this week kind of tempted to go look at the number on the scale, then worry about the number on the scale. And I stopped and I took that thought captive and I thought, what is Satan trying to distract you from? Because God must have something more important for your mind to be focused on. So let's actually identify the actual thing going on here. And it was distraction. That's what Satan was trying to get me to hyperfixate on. And when really God wanted me praying about something else or he wanted me focused on something else. So I think developing that habit of kind of trying the devil's scheme. So
Wow. That which when that's I mean going when you're talking about kind of the root of the problem, like the root of the devil's attacks on us is to get us to not be effective for God. If you're a Christian, he can't take away your salvation, but he can certainly take away your effectiveness here on this earth. And that's incredible to think about how not being distracted by the devil or not giving in to that temptation, whether it's looking at a scale or anything with food, that's just going to make you more effective for God, which is our purpose here on this earth. So, ooh, that's a huge like mind blower there of kind of thinking of it that way when you do feel that attack to know that what does the devil want to keep me from? That is going to be amazing that God wants to use me for. Number one. So that's a great takeaway. I also want to go back to what you said about saving up your calories essentially to eat a burger. Obviously eating disorders can look so many different ways. And, there's somewhere, even thinking about eating a burger at all would be terrifying in other ways where, yeah, you could eat one because you know that you had the calories available. there's just so many ways that it can manifest. But that makes me think too of even like intermittent fasting and things like that, where there's so many things today that are like diet culture, right? Where it's kind of just a sneaky way of a gateway into an eating disorder in some sense. I'm not saying everyone who intermittent fasts has an eating disorder, but I'm just saying like you said, like fueling your body is so important. And if you are hungry and you're not eating, that is a problem. Like that is a problem, even if you know, well, like later I'm gonna eat something else. Going back to your clean plate eater club, if you think I am gonna have a burger later, so I don't want to eat as much now, maybe don't eat the whole burger. Save it for leftovers. Like there's so many ways that you can enjoy food and enjoy it to a point where you're satisfied and not have to worry about, oh, I've got to eat the whole thing now, or I can't eat the rest later. I think that was a problem for me too, where I was like, well, if I don't eat all of this now, I know I'm not going to eat it later because I ate too much. It's kind of like like I'm not going to take this home and eat it for lunch, but like you could, you can have some now, you can have some later, and even like you said, one cookie here, it's nothing is gonna hurt you. But devil is just so sneaky. I need to read that book too, Wild at Heart. I've heard that brought up by other people, and I just have never read it. So now you've got me putting it on my list.
It's a
It sounds
great
really
book.
interesting. Yeah.
Really, I mean, it's marketed for men. I got so much from it, even just as
Mm.
a woman, and actually understanding the men around me a lot more too.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah,
I guess,
God
yeah.
uses so many ways. It's definitely in my like bookcase arsenal for sure. So
Okay. Well, thanks for the recommendation. I can link that in the show notes too for anyone who is interested in reading that. Um, After you recovered, or after you've gone through the journey, was there anything that surprised you about like kind of letting go and finding that food freedom? Anything that surprised you about life, or what you pictured it looking like and what it actually was?
I was blown away with how much more I actually enjoyed meal times
Mm,
because it became less about constantly worrying about the calories in an item and more about the communion that I had with people around me. Or even if I was eating alone, I I look at it often of my relationship with God that like he's sitting right there with me eating
mm,
and having that communion with God. And so it was amazing how meal times became um less of, oh my gosh, I gotta make it to mealtime and I haven't eaten anything all day and I'm starving and like I scarf it down. And less of, oh gosh, what did I eat? That was probably a million calories. And more of, I'm really savoring and enjoying all of this. And my satisfaction isn't just coming from the food, but from the experience.
mm.
And even if that's really mundane, that's very sweet, even in the ordinary and commonplace, what you might experience and just the camaraderie of, if you're having a meal with, family or if you're a friend or something like that. And I focused more on the experience behind it.
That's beautiful. I think for me and probably for you, see if you can relate. Holidays were especially really challenging, and it's so sad because you're like it's a holiday. You want to and have these happy memories with Christmas and all of that, and being afraid of food just took all the joy away from being able to do that for so many years. And that's not how God designed us to live. So
Yeah,
like he
exactly.
wanted us to enjoy the people, and I love that you even brought up just if you're alone, enjoying it with God or embracing the experience. One thing that really helped me after I recovered, the year after I recovered, I started traveling solo and I would go to these other countries and I was like, I have the freedom to enjoy the food here. That's different than the food I could eat in the United States. So that for me was an experience of I'm eating escargot in Paris or I'm trying kangaroo in Australia and
Oh
it
my
stuff like that, where you're like, before I would not have done that, or I would have been really anxious, or I would have chosen things more carefully of like, what can I eat here? And to know that I could sit there and have that experience was amazing and freeing. And so that's a kind of a different extreme of it, but still, there's just so many ways where if you get food and it's an adventure, it changes everything.
I love that. was not in a place of recovery when I got to go to Italy. And I still so often think how much I'm all the food I missed out on, like in that way, like of actually
Yeah.
savoring the experience and the adventure. Like I love that, the adventure of the food. And I look back and I'm like, how you missed out. Like
Oh, you just have to go
it,
back.
I think so. So
Yeah, that's all. That's the simplest solution.
exactly, I agree. I
Hmm.
like that.
Yeah, yeah, because Italian pasta is gotta find some homemade. It's the best.
I did have a lot of gelato. I let
Uh,
myself. So
yeah, the gelato is good too. Yeah, you can't go wrong. But yeah, anywhere in
definitely,
Italy, um, it's just so good. Yeah, so you'll definitely have to go back. It'll be worth it. It's a
I
good
will.
excuse.
Exactly.
Um, all right. Well, I know you talked already about friends of yours who helped you. Is there any other advice, I guess, you'd give to a family member or a friend of someone struggling that how to approach it? Anything different than what you've already shared?
I would say just approach it definitely with the Lord and, invite him into it. And I think you can never go wrong being kind and compassionate. Um, and really, even if empathy is not one of your strong suits, working on a place of how would I feel if someone confronted me on something that was vulnerable, that I was sensitive about, and that you are doing them a favor, not enabling them, but you can come about it in a way that you're not just blurting it out. You can come about it in a way that you're not making them feel like a, bad child, but you can come at it from an angle of, hey, I love you. And if you need me and you want to talk about it, I'm sitting right here when you're ready. I think
Yeah.
kindness never is the wrong approach. So
Kindness. Yeah. So hope that helps people out there who are just so scared to say the wrong thing. Just start with kindness. Is there anything you would say to the person struggling right now who is terrified of maybe telling someone that they're struggling? They're afraid to share with a friend or with a family member. What would you say to them?
I'd say one of the biggest weights you'll ever release is actually admitting it.
Mm.
And I think the most important person you have to admit that to is yourself. Because God already knows. More than likely, a friend or family knows, but you admitting it to you is a really big step. And it's okay to admit it. It doesn't make you any less of a person. It doesn't make you any less lovable. It doesn't make you any less of a worthwhile pursuit and knowing. It just is something that is part of your journey, and you are capable of overcoming it with God and finding that recovery with God, but it doesn't make you any less of a worthwhile human being. And I think there's a lot of freedom on the other side. And I think you can agree, when
Yeah.
you're on the other side of it, it's so much more freeing than when you're locked up in a cage and you have the key the whole time.
Yeah, it is like a cage, and the freedom is incredible. It's worth all of the struggle, all of the um I mean, because even when you do it with God, you still have to make choices and you still have to um choose God every single day and choose his way. So it's not to say that it's easy, but it's so worth it. Yeah. Um so kind of on that note, what would you say to someone who's struggling now and they just believe recovery is impossible?
I would say not to condemn yourself, you know, um, and look at it in the way like, yeah, I have this relapse and I felt so fraudulent. Like, oh my gosh, I'm not actually recovered. I suck, all these different things. And then stopped and looked at it and thought, you still are in a flesh. And the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. And looking at it, I have come so far. I didn't fall all the way down the mountain.
Yeah.
And I can get right back up again and start walking again. But I have to make that choice not to just sit and lay in the mud. And it's a hard choice and it's a scary choice, but it's a doable choice. And I think just inviting, not just God, but those that you trust into the thing too. I have that friend who was really kind and said something, I ask her if she would keep me accountable. I have another really, really close friend and family to me that keeps me accountable. And just knowing I can reach out to them as a safe place when I kind of want to show my cards and show my belly a little bit, like,
Mm,
hey, I'm going to be vulnerable here, but I know who to talk to and I know who's safe. So I would say, call upon the people that you know are safe to talk to about things. And usually they're people that you're safe to talk to about things that aren't eating disorder related.
mm.
So,
Oh, that's great advice. And even talking about people who are safe, thinking you don't have to assume like if I tell someone they're gonna, oh, now they have to fix me and maybe I'm not ready for that yet. Sometimes you can talk to someone before you're maybe fully ready to recover. Or you're just at a point where you're like, I know something needs to change. I want to start that journey. That doesn't mean as soon as you tell someone you have to recover tomorrow. Like that's not how it works. So I hope that people you get that message too, where I think that was scary for me. It was like, oh, as soon as I tell someone, I'm gonna have to just be, I've got to figure this out tomorrow and quit cold turkey. And you don't have to. It's still a process. It's still a journey. You just have people with you in the journey that make it easier. And so you're not just putting it all on yourself. Yeah, that's just great advice to remember. Um, so I'd like you to have a chance to share some more about your own ministry and things that you're working on. I would love to, we'll put that in put it all in the show notes, but I want you to share how people can connect with you, what else they can get from you.
thank you.
Mm,
I love connecting with people. A big thing with me, and that I feel that the Lord has invited me into, is just inviting people to the lunch table, inviting them to just come have coffee and to feel safe. Come as they are. You don't have to have it all together. You don't have to be perfect. Like you said, you don't have to like be fully recovered and healed. There's a
mm,
seat for you. And operating in a way of inviting into that safe place, even if we never talk in real life, that feeling. And the books that I have out now, I have really sought to do that. I have another book coming out, The Wallflower That Bloomed. It's coming out in May, and that is the entire heart of the book, is encouraging people and being vulnerable and fearlessly authentic and who they were made to be. And you don't have to have it all together for that. So, um, love connect on Instagram, and I've got my website, HallieLogan.com. But I really do have just such a sincere heart about that heart connection. So, if you know anybody or you have somebody that you think that would be a good fit for, that'll be coming out in May. And then my first book, Hang in There Girl, I actually go into eating disorders a good bit and talk about that, just even kind of like a big sister book. So
very cool. Yeah, you have something I feel like for everyone. I'm really excited to read your book coming out soon. I think I can definitely relate to that. My whole life feeling kind of like a wallflower, and looking forward to that. And then um, your first book too, for all of them. So we will link all of that in the show notes so that y'all can connect with Callie on Instagram, on her website, and check out her books and just see her heart for just being that friend, coming to the lunch table. We all need that friend in that space to just be ourselves and to not feel like we have to be inauthentic and try to please people or try to be someone that we're not, because that's not how good God designed us to be. We are each unique individuals and we should embrace each other and how God made us.
amen.
Love your heart for that, Callie. And thank you so much for spending time today, sharing your story. I know it's going to help people out there who are in that space right now and they just need help, or their friends or family too. You had a lot of great advice for them as well. So thank you.
Thank you so much for letting me come on, and just it was a joy to be here tonight.
Hey, friend. I hope this conversation encouraged you today. And if it did, please let me know by rating and reviewing the Recover with God podcast wherever you are listening. Your feedback helps others find this podcast too. And click that follow button so you don't miss new episodes airing every Wednesday this season. Be sure to check out the show notes for all the links and additional resources we talked about today. And don't forget, whether you need help or you want to help, all help comes from God.